everybody. It's great to see you all here after many emails and communications in the last many months. I'm Kim Conniff-Tabor. I'm the editorial director of the Democracy and Culture Foundation. And I had the pleasure of leading one of these expert roundtables in the summertime at the end of June. Ours was on disinformation, and we had a group of 14 experts from 7 different countries. Experts including people like Don Nakagawa, who's here with us today from the Berggruen Institute, Mete Coban from My Life, My Say, the founder of My Life, My Say, Tony Silberfeld, who will be joining us in a few moments, Ben Scott from Reset, the executive director of Reset, which is an initiative of Luminate, the lawyer Dan Chaffet, who you may have seen on the video a little earlier, who leads the Association for Accountability and Internet Democracy, Irene Zismos of the European Commission, Inga Spring of the Baltic Center for Investigative Journalism. So as you can see, a great group of experts. We had a very robust discussion over about 3 hours on this thorny issue of disinformation. How can we tackle disinformation while still safeguarding democracy? So we, together with the experts, came up with kind of 3 areas of focus. I wouldn't call them, they were proposals, but not fleshed out proposals, more areas that we wanted to put our attention to and explore further with the citizens panels. And so one area was education initiatives, focusing on either high school students, bolstering critical thinking and debate skills, and then older citizens with a focus on digital literacy. We talked about content moderation. There was a lot of debate about content moderation, whether it's even possible. Many people think that it, of course, is and should be looked at more closely, but it's a difficult issue. But we came up with a proposal of a minimum number of content moderators in local languages is an issue that we decided to focus on. And then we looked at credible sources, incentives and disincentives, so creating business incentives for tech platforms to amplify reliable information using standards like the Journalism Trust Initiative, and then on the other side, slowing down the spread of potentially harmful viral content. So we came up with these proposals, and then we put them to the stress test of the citizen panels. But one thing that was a little bit different about our group of proposals is that we also decided to call on Mete and his group, My Life, My Say, and have them put it to one of their signature democracy cafes, which focuses on the youth perspective. So we had both the citizens panel, Greek citizens, and then also the youth perspective. So Mete is going to go over sort of how that fed into our approach and helped us look again at our proposals in a new light. So I'll hand it off to Mete here.
Thank you very much, Kim. Hi everyone, my name is Mete. I'm from My Life, My Say in London. Firstly, very strong apologies for my very strong London accent, in case you can't understand, so I will try to speak a little bit slower. It's an honor to be here for the 2nd year running and seeing the Athens Democracy Forum growing from strength to strength. And obviously, what I love about the forum is not just about the forum, the day itself, but it's about what happens in between each forum and how we engage with citizens around the world to understand how we can strengthen our democracy. So the first stress test that we had was with our citizens panel. As you can see there, we had 25 Greek citizens, ages between 25 and 55. And some of the key findings that what I'm going to talk to you a bit about, it's important to note there are lots of things, but of course we're very limited with time. And of course, one of the key findings, or the overall key finding, was that a lot of the expert panel's assumptions were obviously challenged by a lot of the citizens. And obviously, when you look at sort of social media, where it says, as the ancient agora, many people felt that it was an opportunity and a sort of a place for free exchange of ideas, for information, without seeking to impose a specific viewpoint. And that's obviously in contrary to what we see from traditional media, where many citizens felt that, a lot of them do tend to have a sort of biasness or a sort of a more lenient viewpoint. So social media sort of, in many ways, gave that balance for a lot of citizens where they were able to go on there and see diverse views of information. Some of the panelists challenged the notion that there is such thing as truth or a clear difference between fact and opinion. Others posited it as scientific facts, and obviously data establishes truth. And obviously this is something, a big challenge that we all face around the world, which is, in the age of Trump, what is fact and obviously what is truth, and it's something that I think we're all trying to sort of grapple with. And obviously it's really important that we need to take these factors into consideration when we're sort of putting together our policies. And then of course the posing limits is a danger to democracy. I think one of the key signals that we received from citizens was that there was a clear rejection of, or clear no towards regulation. I think a lot of them saw this as a way of sort of trying to, because the question is who defines what is fake news, or how do you define it, and then who then regulates it. And obviously one of the ideas that we had was about having local moderators, and this was something that wasn't too sort of seen too keen by our citizen panels. And then finally, of course, the education piece, which is about how do you strengthen sort of critical thinking, and obviously, strengthening kids' understanding ability to differentiate the difference between facts and obviously understanding sources, which Tony will go on to talk a bit about a bit later. I'll take us on to the next slide, which is the Democracy Cafe that we hosted with young people, and just to compare sort of some of their responses. And of course, again, one of the key things that we saw from young people coming out from this discussion is that social media gives a much more comprehensive story. And what they mean by that is, and we've heard a lot of this issue about trust towards, traditional political institutions or media institutions. And of course, young people, certainly there is a growing mistrust towards those traditional forms of institutions. So they see social media as a much more sort of an opportunity for them to, one, express their opinion, but to get much more diverse sort of views. And as you can see there, it says mainstream outlets are obviously biased or falsely neutral. That was some of the key stark things that were coming out of it. Some of the possible solutions, which will go on to sort of talk a bit about more, but there was a lot of discussions about the role that influencers could play, particularly in sort of making sure that you're getting the right levels of information. And I think we could start to see that through various governments around the world, particularly with COVID and vaccinations, where you could see they've deployed a lot of influencers to try to sort of encourage trust between young people and obviously and sort of the institutions. And of course, there's other things like infographic activism, so Instagram and what you see on there, and the list can go on and on and on. But I guess in summary, it's one of those things that what we found is that fake news is obviously for a lot of the citizens where it's something where it can be either a phenomenon or either it's something that is very dangerous to sort of democracy. And how do you regulate who defines it? And what we've seen is that there's a lack of trust between citizens and sort of those more decision-making institutions. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pass over to Tony. He's going to be joining us from, I believe, the US. He's going to be talking about how the citizens' reactions helped us reshape our proposals.
Change the slide. Hopefully we can get Tony on the screen to present the next. Okay, here we go, and we're just missing Tony. Hopefully you can get on. Give him a moment. Otherwise, we can go on and explain them. Let me just ask. Do we have Tony? Yeah, he's here, apparently, so we'll just give him a moment. There we go. Hello. We can't hear you. Just one moment. Try again.
Can you all hear me okay now?
Yeah.
We can hear you now.
Good. Sorry, it sounds like there were some technical challenges this morning, so I'm flying a little bit blind, so bear with me. It's nice to see everybody, at least virtually. So what I wanted to do is just pick up on the back of what Kim and Mete was talking about and take it to the next phase and figure out exactly how we can bring together the comments that were made by the Democracy Cafe and the Citizens Panel and connect it to the proposals that we made as a group, and which is not an easy challenge, as you can imagine. And what we'll try to do is come up with some ideas, some concrete ideas that we might be able to take forward. We don't have all the solutions, but we have some thoughts that I'd like to share with the group. The first thing I wanted to get into, and I can't see the slides in front of me, but I've got it here on paper. So Kim, if you don't mind just advancing as we go through, I'd appreciate it. The first thing I want to talk about is the education initiatives that have been covered already, but give it a little bit more context in terms of how we reacted to the citizens' discussion about it. The first issue I wanted to raise is around the demographic breakdown. there is no one-size-fits-all solution to how to deal with this problem. And the way that we've broken it out here, based on the conversations that we had, was around Generation Z, and this idea that the real need there is for critical thinking skills. That it's not about media literacy, but how do we encourage young people to think critically about how they absorb information and act on it. The second group that we looked at was a combination of baby boomers and Generation X. Looking at the challenge there is more about how to improve their media literacy skills. If you look at all the data, it's, if you look at how fake news is circulated, in large part, particularly in the US, but I'm sure it's the same elsewhere, that it's those 55 and older that are actually mostly responsible for circulating fake news around the internet. And so media literacy was something that we really wanted to focus on in that demographic as a challenge to tackle. There is a thing that really was surprising to all of us as we went through some of the conversations as a smaller group, and that was this idea that came up about not being able to distinguish between opinion and fact. It was really startling, actually, to see that there really didn't seem to be any ability to distinguish between the two. And so we're trying to think about ways to make that more clear. This seems like something that should be straightforward, but clearly it's a muddled information environment and makes that impossible to do. One of the ideas that came up on the back of this is to figure out if there's a particular guide that we can use. In this case, it would be the Journalism Trust Initiative, or how to establish a fact. So unless we can come up with a way where everybody can agree what a fact is and how to get to that point, we're going to keep running into these problems over and over again. So it's just another thing we wanted to highlight. On the back of what Mete was talking about in terms of other ways to connect with the new generation, the solution pathway that we're talking about here is multimedia education initiatives. So to us, Mete already talked about infographic activism, but it could also be video, digital animations. The idea of connecting entertainment with education. It can't be mutually exclusive anymore. Young people want to be entertained, older people want to be entertained. So if we can educate them in the process, maybe we can get some traction to deal with this issue. Kim, if you don't mind advancing to the next slide, I'll move on. I know time is relatively short. The next item that we were tackling is around content moderation. This was a tricky one when it came to the citizens' reaction to potential solutions here. One thing that it seems like everybody could agree on is that content moderation in local language in smaller countries needed to be upgraded. So Greece is an obvious example of how that might work in practice. I know there was a Latvian example, Lithuanian example. There doesn't seem to be any issue when it comes to the social media platforms and providing the adequate number of content moderators in French and English and even German. Where we get to the smaller countries, it's where we have an issue. And where disinformation, the seeds of disinformation begin, sometimes occur at the smaller countries and then expand outward. And so we can address it in each of these countries with a minimum baseline of content moderators in the local language. We might be able to get a bit ahead of the game. So that was on that point. We did receive a lot of pushback from the citizens when it comes to who decides what content is acceptable. How do we moderate the actual terms of what appears? There seems to be no appetite at all for real content moderation when it comes to deciding what is in and what is out, what is political, what is over the line. What we seem to be able to agree on, at least, is that there should be limits on hate speech and incitement to violence. So if you get nothing else out of this, that should at least be a starting point to move forward. And I think that's at least a place where we can find some agreement. What was interesting to me is the question of, and this takes us to the third point around the solution pathway, is who should be the moderators? There is no trust. That's one thing that was very clear. There is no trust of the social media platform or government to be the arbiters of what is acceptable speech online. And so one of the ideas that came into the discussion is this idea of an independent citizens review panel made up of the people. That was a particularly appealing discussion when it comes to the Greek context and the idea of the agora. So I think that has legs. What this looks like ultimately on the ground is something that I think merits further discussion, but I thought it was an interesting difference between what people think is acceptable and what we as a group thought was acceptable. So we need to move in the direction of what the people think on this. And then I'll take you to the last slide, maybe the most challenging one of them all, when it comes to an opportunity to move forward, and that's around incentives and disincentives. We've done a lot of studies around how quickly fake news versus facts travel around the globe. There was an MIT study recently that talked about how a fake news story travels 70% more likely to be retweeted on Twitter than a factual story, or that true news takes 6 times longer to reach 1,500 people than fake news. So, I mean, this is a real challenge and an obstacle that we have to overcome. And the business model that's in place, really incentivizing fake news and keeping people on the site in titillating ways is antithetical to what we're trying to achieve here and creates a huge problem for us. So this particular category of issues presents many more questions than it does answers. In the first instance, it's clear, at least from what we're hearing, that there is a greater opportunity around the incentive side than on disincentives. So punishing companies, having governments fining private entities doesn't seem to be something that is appealing to anyone, at least on the citizen side. So how do we find incentives to create a space where if you move factual news forward, is there a financial incentive to doing so? And what does that look like? There's also a question that we discussed around platform liability. Again, this is an issue that doesn't seem to be resonating particularly well when it comes to how do we make platforms more liable for what they put on their platforms. So I hate to end on a less optimistic note. I think the education initiatives provide the best pathway forward, but it is worth highlighting that there's a discussion around incentives and disincentives, but there is a lot of work to be done on that front, and maybe an opportunity for all of us to have a further discussion of what might be possible there. So with that, I'll leave it and turn it back over to Kim. Thanks all very much for having me.
Thank you so much, Tony, and Mete too, and thank you, Tony, for getting up so early. It's like 5 a.m. over there, so we appreciate that. And there's much to chew on here, but unfortunately we're out of time. So I'll now introduce Antigone Liberaki from Solidarity Now. Will be joining the stage for the next presentation. Thank you.